So when I look at the world and say, why is it screwed up? Why is there such a gap between the rich and the poor? Why is real estate in a bubble? You can trace much of it back to 50 years ago, August 15th, 1971. January of 1972, I was on an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea when because I missed the announcement that what Nixon did in August 15th. And it changed my life because I'm on this aircraft carrier as a Marine pilot, and I get this letter from Rich Dad via snail mail saying that, hey, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. Well, it took me 6 months to get that letter. But anyway, with that, I didn't know what it meant. Back in 1971, for those who may not know it, it was illegal for Americans to own gold because in 1933, FDR took the dollar off the gold standard. He also caused Social Security. FDR really screwed this economy up way back then. So I couldn't own gold. We didn't know what gold was. How in the world can the CEO of a company borrow money just to jack the price of their stocks? And why are real estate prices so high? And if you want to know why the rich are getting richer, the poor middle class are getting poorer, our money is fake. And anybody saving dollars is a loser right now, and because they keep printing it.
So on August 15th, 1971, that is when Nixon closed the gold window. Of course, when he closed it, he said it was just temporary, but it's been 50 years and it hasn't reopened. But what you spoke about FDR in 1933 is true, because that's the year when the government made it illegal for Americans to own monetary gold. So American citizens could not take their Federal Reserve notes back to the Federal Reserve and get real dollars, which were made of gold. All they could do was negotiate, circulate the Federal Reserve notes. But if you were not American, if you lived outside the United States, you were still able to take your Federal Reserve notes to the Federal Reserve and actually get paid the gold that the notes promised to pay. And so that continued up until 1971. And basically what was happening in the late 1960s, early 1970s, was we started to run very big deficits in the 1960s to pay for the war in Vietnam, to pay to go to the moon, to pay for the war on poverty, and all sorts of government programs. And so we ran these big deficits, and the Federal Reserve was then monetizing the deficits. Now we call it QE. They hadn't thought of that word back then, but that's what they were doing. So the Fed was doing QE to monetize all this government spending. We didn't have the gold, and our foreign creditors were suspicious that we didn't have enough gold to meet our obligations. So they started to show up at the gold window with their Federal Reserve notes asking for the gold. Well, we didn't have enough, and so we ended up defaulting on our obligations, because really Federal Reserve notes were promises to pay gold, and we defaulted on that promise. And so anybody who says the U.S. government has never defaulted on an obligation, that's not true. That was a massive default in 1971. And, we've been on this fiat-based monetary system ever since. And I think this system is now on the verge of an implosion. And I think we're going to see this, relatively soon, where the dollar now collapses and the world returns to the gold standard just without the dollar. Because when the world was on a dollar standard after Bretton Woods, it was because the dollar was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand into gold. And after we defaulted, the dollar, lost a lot of value in the 1970s, about 2/3 of its value relative to the Deutsche Mark, the yen, the Swiss franc. But it continued to serve as the reserve, and it's a reserve currency to this day. I think that status is what's in jeopardy. It would look pretty bad for America, because a return to the gold standard would mean a rejection of the dollar standard. And so if the dollar was no longer desired as the reserve, the value of the dollar on international exchanges would collapse, because we have these record trade deficits. I mean, the last trade deficit we had, all-time record high, we're running trade deficits of about $1.2 trillion a year. It is enormous. But the only reason we could do this is because the world will take dollars for their stuff. But if they go back to a gold standard, they ain't going to take dollars for their stuff. We're going to have to give them gold, which we don't have, or we're going to have to produce stuff, which we can't because we don't have the factories. We don't have the infrastructure, the labor force, the supply chains. So the dollar is going to collapse. And what's going to happen is all of these products that Americans take for granted are on the shelves when they want to buy something. They're all going to be gone because we're not going to be able to afford them. I mean, they're going to be too expensive for Americans to buy. So the entire American standard of living is going to collapse. Now, it's not going to make that big a difference for a lot of the other countries outside the US because they don't issue reserve currencies. So, if you're living in New Zealand, for example, the New Zealand dollar isn't a reserve currency. So if you want to import something, you've got to export something. And so people in New Zealand have to earn dollars. We don't have to earn dollars. We just print them. Well, now the people in New Zealand will start earning gold instead of dollars. But the change for America is huge because we used to be able to print dollars. We can't print gold. We have to earn gold just like everybody else. And that's a game changer for Americans. But it's also a game changer for people who have savings, people who, are hoping to retire. If you think you're going to retire on a bunch of dollars, you got another thing coming. It's the dollars that are going to retire, not you. You're going to keep on working unless you take action now to divest yourself of US dollars and dollar-denominated assets and buy some real things, foreign stocks, property, gold and silver. You got to get out of paper and into actual things that have real value and that can generate real income. But what's going to be worse is if the stock market doesn't crash, because the only thing that's going to prevent the stock market from crashing is the dollar crashing instead. And that's even worse if you're planning on retiring. So I think the baby boom is probably screwed either way, unless they act now and completely change their investment portfolios to be prepared for both a stock market crash or a dollar crash. They have to be prepared for either one. But the dollar crash is actually worse. In the dollar crash, the stock market goes up, but it doesn't matter that it went up because the value goes down anyway. I mean, go take a look at a chart of the Zimbabwe stock market. That market never crashed. It went straight up. The problem is it didn't go up as much as the Zimbabwe dollar went down. So, you could see the stock market going up, but if everything at the supermarket is going up 2 or 3 times as fast, you're not getting richer, right? You're getting poorer, even though you have a higher net worth in dollars. Look, there are lots of billionaires in Zimbabwe. There are trillionaires in Zimbabwe. Who cares? I mean, you're a trillionaire, but you're broke, right? Because the money isn't worth anything. So if you think you're going to retire because you got $5 million, $10 million, you don't know. What if $10 million is what it costs to buy a cup of coffee?